Hello friends. Lesser Lord Kusanali or NAHIDA recently got her official design and, well, I'm a little disappointed. Now, Sumeru's story isn't done and she isn't even playable yet at the time of writing, so we don't know if her design fits her role, gameplay and story. But I'm sure you can agree when standing next to Venti and Zhongli, two of the best character designs in the game, her visuals are a little weak. So, today I'm hoping to give our little grass god a fresher, more interesting look to better serve her location, personality and role in Genshin's world. But before we get into actually designing, it's good to establish her original premise, what works, what doesn't, and what our goals are with her redesign. So, what's her original premise? She's the Dendro Archon of Wisdom of Sumeru and is the youngest of the 7 at 500 years old. However, the Academia, the real rulers of Sumeru, prefer to revere the memory of the deceased Great Lord Rukkhadevata, making her feel vastly inferior to her predecessor, and there are few in Sumeru who worship her. Now, before we get into criticizing NAHIDA, I should clarify, she doesn't have a bad design, only a disappointing one for how important she is, and we should point out the things that are done well. First off, the swirly pattern on her dress and cuff are a unique and cool visual motif to tie into the Dendro element. There's even a nod to the Caduceus staff on her dress, which along with the plus symbols in her eyes are both common health symbols. And her outfit and hair being mainly white isn't a bad thing. White is the colour of purity and innocence. She became Archon after the Cataclysm, so she likely doesn't have as much blood on her hands as the rest of the 7. And something interesting about her palette, she's wearing her Archon outfit. Let me contextualise a little. The fandom has picked up on the design convention of the Archon outfit, an attire coloured white, gold and whatever associated element colour is relevant. It was usually worn in the Archon's past at a point that they were fully embracing their divine identity. What's interesting is none of them wear it anymore. Not even A, who isn't incognito. My theory is it's because they've been alive for a long time and developed an identity outside of their godhood. For example, A is a closeted lesbian, Zhongli has 3 adopted kids, and Venti is an alcoholic. But NAHIDA still wears her outfit. She has never left the sanctuary of Surastana, which is owned by the Academia, meaning she has only ever been surrounded by people who saw her for the death of her forebearer, and she has little identity outside of how she pales in comparison. And quick side tangent, this white and gold palette is a reference to the Hindu goddess of knowledge, Saraswati, who is depicted as, quote, a beautiful light-skinned woman with 4 arms, dressed in a white saree with a gold trim, and sitting on a white lotus. Hoyoverse made the confusing decision to make the rest of the Archons all ladies, despite the guys in Genshin having consistently better designs. But I do think having one of the Archons use the little girl model type adds some interesting variety to the 7's roster, and it certainly helps sell the idea that she's the youngest among them, and it makes her more sympathetic as a neglected child of Sumeru, not given enough time to prove herself. And whilst I have some problems with her face and outfit, you gotta admit, she baby. And fun fact, this ties in with some real-world folklore, specifically that of Kusanali Jetaka, a grass fairy bodhisattva who lived in a clump of kusha grass and who helped save a tree fairy's home through trickery. The moral of the poem is not to judge someone by their appearance. This explains her fairy-like form and reframes her weak looks as purposefully misleading. Although there are some problems with her taking inspiration from Celtic fairies. Now that I know what to keep, let's get into the problems I have with her design. I mentioned liking her colour palette, though to be more accurate, it was the concept of her palette I liked. The execution, however, it looks like a hospital. This is mainly because the colours are very muddy, especially the gold, which would have in theory drawn the palette away from the grey-green hospital look and towards something much richer and welcoming. If you want a good example of gold being used to help a design, Jean and D-Look's design also have this grey-gold accent, but the reason their designs work is that the other colours in their palette are nice to look at on their own, and the gold parts simply help to make the design feel richer. Her hair, which is the worst offender of hospital colour palette, doesn't look thought out at all. Like, they didn't want to make the hair boring, so they added details, but it ends up looking like a bad haircut, a problem that A suffers from as well. A lot of details, such as the hair accessories and armbands, feel like they're more there to fill out space rather than contribute anything to the greater design. Genshin's world building and story has done a very good job at convincing me that the Archons are really powerful. Visually, power is presented with clever shape language and a bulky silhouette to make them feel heavier and bigger. The problem is that her silhouette and shape language is way too petite. The cape is trying to avoid this issue, but it's not very well executed. Her small stature sells her being weak, but her story is about her being underestimated, so her having no hints of her being more competent and wise than she's given credit for is a mistake. Foreshadowing in stories and character designs are good, it's only made bad if the events it's hinted at are only good for shock value. Although she's from Sumeru, her outfit doesn't suggest she's from there. I'm not saying there are no references to Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian culture, but it's not as obvious and distinctive as it could be. Plus, the dress just doesn't look very good. It's not very original in its shape, and it doesn't have anything interesting of note going on besides its embroidery, and small tangent, her shoes are weirdly chunky. A lot of the little girl models have short skirts and a lot of exposed leg with nothing interesting going on there, so to make the silhouette less boring, they give them these chunky shoes and it just feels odd, especially for the Middle Eastern inspiration. Shoes from there are usually something similar to ballet flats or sandals. Since I knew nothing about her gameplay at the time of writing other than she used the Dendro element, it's difficult for me to determine if she's using a melee weapon, bow, or catalyst. This doesn't usually affect designs too much, but I'm assuming she's a catalyst since those characters tend to have more of a glass cannon feel, as if they can be powerful but have no need or interest to become proficient in any weapon. And they can have crazier designs since we're not worried about their clothes being impractical for combat. And before we wrap up this section, let's address the elephant in the room here.
Nothing brightens a dark room like light from a window. Time to open the window. Oh no! Why? Why is this happening?
Surprise!
My eyes are on fire! Ah!
Why is she so pasty? I'm not gonna say much because I'm not really in the position to, and everything that can be said has been said 100 times over, so I'll keep this short. Nahida is the face of the nation based off the Middle East and Southeast Asia. She should look like the people who live there. We cool? We cool. Though, if you do want a more detailed look at this topic, there's a fantastic video by Dollop of Daisy that summarizes most of my thoughts on the subject. It's definitely worth a watch. Before we get into designing my girl, it would be good to boil Nahida down to her core ideas, so we know what kind of things we need to present visually. Inferiority was the main one I've already gone over. It's so fundamentally rooted in her character, in how she compares herself to the moon, only reflecting a fraction of the real sun's light. She is also very sheltered and reclusive. When she's appearing and helping people in their dreams, she never explains who she is, and she has, of course, never left the sanctuary of Suristana in the 500 years she's been alive. Though we know from Dunyazad and her interactions with the Traveler that she's very kind and is doing what little she can. Okay, let's get into the designs. At the time of making these first few concepts, we hadn't received any information on Nahida outside leaks, so a lot of these designs are going to be a lot more experimentative. Our first design is focused on a lack of humanity and identity, as shown through Nahida's bored, lifeless face, and I intentionally left out any personal flares and imperfections in her hair and outfit, as they were decided for her. I kept the Celtic fairy influence in her dress, which I attempted to make look like a white lotus, although I think the Celtic influence is confusing to her inspiration, and olive branches in her hair, symbols of harvest in the Middle East. By coincidence, this symbol lines up with the Greek goddess of wisdom Athena. Lastly, I gave her a veil, obscuring enough to make her look distant in both emotion and status, but also secretive and obscuring. In this exploration, I dressed Nahida in a bland white dress inspired by upper-class clothing from Thailand, the only splashes of colour being from the green sash across her dress, her eyes, and the halo of olive leaves behind her head, inspired by the shape of Vietnamese headdresses. This paints her as lacking in identity and flair outside of the dendro greens. I decided to make her face more focused and childlike and her hair freer, but still short and bare bones. For as much as this is one of my favourite designs on visuals alone, there's a pretty big disconnect between the personality and outfit. For my third design, I tried to make her power and wisdom more present, with Nahida dressed in a borrowed sire and a veiled crown, giving her a wider silhouette. I also placed a focus on more jewellery and indicators of wealth beyond just gold embroidery, with her wearing kundan jewellery and decorative gold coins. I think the problem with this design is that it places too much focus on material wealth. By this stage, I was realizing the concept arts were getting rather repetitive, and I had to take a step back and reconsider where I was taking the design. I had also started to look into some of Nahida's inspirations, Saraswati and Kusanali Jataka, as well as having a better idea of her personality. I was also looking into the cultural significance of clothing and such, as I was trying to stray towards a crazier design that would push the boundaries of what a playable Genshin character can look like, because here's the thing. I'd rather play as most of the enemies in this game just because they're allowed to have crazier designs and silhouettes. elements. And you can't argue that more off-the-wall designs would be too impractical to animate because look at some of Hongai's designs. As long as a design can be rigged to the basic character animations, there's no reason for Hoyoverse not to branch out, other than time and effort, but it's not like Nahida isn't important enough. Moving on to the next design, I decided to fully embrace the Flower God Festival setting with Mendi tattoos on her hands and feet, a dress inspired by children's clothing for the Diwali festival, and white lotuses weaved into a side braid. What I wasn't expecting was creating a design that felt both friendly and reclusive. For Sari, her bangs and braid hide her left side, obscuring her silhouette, making her feel distant and hidden. It also differentiates her silhouette from the normal shuttlecock shape of the little girl characters. To further distinguish her visually, I gave her a parasol, which I imagined as a prop Nahida would incorporate into her attack, idle, and dialogue animations. It could also, depending on the angle it's viewed from, or whether or not it's open, could be used to obscure parts of Nahida, affect lighting, or make her silhouette bigger to momentarily enlarge her silhouette and implicit power. For this last concept, I decided to take another crack at a design that presented great power and intelligence. I gave her a symmetrical hair parting with a mangtika and glasses to help highlight a clever face. And to help link back to Saraswati, she has a white sari and another set of arms that would appear during her burst. It's a good design, but the confidence and perfect symmetry work counter to Nahida's insecurity. Okay, now that we have our concepts, let's move on to breaking down the final design. Usually when deciding on what elements make it into the final version, it's good to look over your previous ideas and decide on what elements you want incorporated into the final design. This design is the best one by far. It has a good silhouette and the implicit symbolism and emotions are strong, so I'll be using it as the main base. The face from the second design is probably the clearest in personality. It feels like it could be clever, childish, and kind all at once, and I'll probably use the pattern on the sari for this one, because its visual language ties into the dendro symbol. This design was good, but it didn't fit Nahida very well. Though, I will keep the caps. I think it makes her silhouette very unique. I did add an earring since, while she's still a kid, she has been forced into a role of maturity and responsibility, and I felt something like jewelry would help portray that. I chose not to take anything from the first and third concepts, either because they didn't fit her personality, or the ideas in the designs were just clearer somewhere else. Before drawing a turnaround for Nahida, I decided to try and flesh out some elements of her design, specifically the pattern on her sari, her side braid, her parasol, and the mendi on her hands, almost all of which were changed pretty significantly in the final piece, because I'm indecisive. Now, I complained about Nahida's color palette before, so I did probably too many color concepts of varying quality. The two I debated was a very pastel and pale design, emphasizing purity and innocence. It makes me think of confectionery decorations. It's a really solid palette, but unfortunately, the values in her color scheme are very similar, and it'd be very difficult to tell different elements apart. I instead went with this palette, though I did end up making some minor changes. It has nice values and contrast, and the bluer tones and hues make her feel more melancholy. It fits her personality pretty well. For the last part of this video, I'll show you the process for Nahida's wish art. For those not in the know, every Genshin character has a fully painted piece of splash art shown when you unlock them. A good splash art will show off their abilities in game, important design elements, and personality overall. Are they closed off or friendly? Just some kid or a terrifying ancient badass? Their pose and surroundings and palette can massively affect someone's initial view of the character. Fun fact, you can tell who's an Archon just by their wish art because you can see their nation in the background. Since at the time of drawing this I didn't know anything about her gameplay, I tried and probably failed to implement this aspect the most. I drew up 4 thumbnails, all of which incorporated her parasol as a big part of her design. In nearly all of them, I intended that the shadow cast by the parasol would be where you would see the landscape of Sumeru, but I ultimately decided on this pose. I realized the shape of her dress and parasol created part of a bubble with a good amount of free space for a well-integrated background. With that out of the way, I'll be quiet and just let you watch the speed paint. And there it is, my redesign for Nahida. Of course, it's far from flawless, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Are there any things you would change about my design, her original design, or do you think she's fine just the way she is? Please let me know down in the comments. I probably won't be making this a series because this video took so much longer than I expected, though if I make any other redesigns, I'll post it on my social media. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching and have a good one.